I served the Alpha's Luna for years, until the Alpha King saw the scars she left on me and went feral. Elara Voss had learned, a long time ago, that silence was the safest language in the Crimson Moon Pack. She moved through the Luna's chambers like a shadow, careful and quiet, carrying trays and folding linens, and never once meeting anyone's eyes for too long. 6 years had taught her exactly how to disappear in plain sight, and most days, she was good at it. She had come to the pack house at 16, an Omega with no parents and no protector, grateful simply to have a roof and a purpose. Luna Seraphine had seemed kind enough at first, soft-spoken, elegant, the kind of woman everyone in the pack admired from a distance. It was only behind closed doors that Elara learned the truth, that kindness could be a mask, and that some people only showed their real selves when no one else was watching. Over the years, the bruises came and went. Elara told herself they didn't matter. She wore long sleeves even in summer, kept her chin low, and reminded herself every morning that this was simply her life now. The rest of the pack believed Seraphine was gentle and generous, a Luna worth following. Elara was just the clumsy servant girl who tripped too often, who burned her own hands while cooking, who bruised easily. No one asked questions, no one wanted to. She had stopped expecting anyone to notice. That changed on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when the pack house buzzed with a kind of nervous energy Elara hadn't felt in years. Word had spread overnight. The Alpha King himself, Damien Ashgrove, was coming for an inspection. Every pack under his rule answered to him, and visits from the Alpha King were rare and significant, the kind of event that could make or break a pack's standing for a generation. The house was a flurry of motion since dawn. Floors were scrubbed twice. Curtains were replaced. Seraphine spent hours selecting the perfect dress, the perfect smile, rehearsing words that would make her sound like the ideal Luna. Elara worked twice as hard as usual, preparing trays, polishing silver, trying to make herself even smaller than normal, so she wouldn't draw attention on a day when everyone's nerves were stretched thin. By mid-afternoon, the Alpha King had arrived. Elara caught only glimpses of him from the kitchen doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with an unmistakable presence that seemed to fill the entire hallway even from a distance. Pack members straightened their backs when he passed. Even the Alpha himself, usually so commanding, seemed smaller standing next to him. There was something different about Damien Ashgrove, something that made the air feel charged, like the moment before a storm. Elara had no reason to think she would ever come close to him. Omegas like her didn't speak to Alpha Kings. They served and stayed out of the way, and were grateful simply not to be noticed. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. She had been carrying a tray of tea to the Luna's private sitting room when Seraphine intercepted her in the hallway, her expression tight with the strain of playing the perfect hostess all day. "You're too slow," Seraphine hissed under her breath, glancing toward the door where important guests waited just beyond. "Do you want to embarrass me in front of him?" Before Elara could answer, Seraphine's hand shot out and shoved her shoulder, not hard enough to draw notice from a distance, but enough to send Elara stumbling. The tray clattered from her hands, porcelain shattered against the floor, and as she fell, her sleeve caught on the edge of a side table and tore clean from wrist to elbow. For one terrible exposed moment, her arm was bare. Years of scars lay revealed in the afternoon light, old marks gone silver with time, newer ones still faintly pink, a map of pain she had spent years hiding beneath fabric and careful silence. She scrambled to gather the broken porcelain, heart hammering, desperate to cover her arm again before anyone saw. She didn't notice, at first, that someone had. Damien Ashgrove had been walking the corridor only a few steps behind, drawn by the sound of breaking china. He stopped mid-stride. His gaze fell first on the shattered tray, then on Elara kneeling on the floor, and finally, inevitably, on her bared arm. Something in him went very still. An Alpha King's instincts were not like an ordinary wolf's. Centuries of leadership had sharpened something ancient and protective in him, a sense that could read pain and fear and old, buried suffering, the way other people read words on a page. And what he saw on Elara's arm was not the mark of a single accident. It was a story, written in scars, of years of harm carefully hidden from sight. His wolf, usually leashed and silent beneath his calm exterior, surged forward with a ferocity that startled even him. "Who did this to you?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was something underneath it, a current of barely restrained anger that made the air in the hallway feel suddenly heavier. Elara froze. She had spent 6 years perfecting the art of small, quiet answers that wouldn't cause trouble. "It was an accident, my lord," she said quickly, pulling the torn fabric back over her arm. "I'm clumsy. It happens often." "Often," he repeated, and the words seemed to settle on him like a weight. His eyes moved to Seraphine, who had gone pale and was already opening her mouth to explain. "She trips constantly," Seraphine said, forcing a light, dismissive laugh. "I've told her 100 times to be more careful. You know how servants can be. It might have worked, on anyone else. But Damien Ashgrove had not become the Alpha King by being easily fooled. Among his many gifts was an instinct sharpened by years of judging truth from lies among pack leaders far more practiced in deception than Seraphine. He could feel the falseness in her words, the way one feels a sour note in a song. He knelt, slowly, and gently took Elara's arm before she could pull it fully away. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if he understood without being told how much courage it had taken her to survive this long without breaking. "This was not an accident," he said quietly. "Not a question. A certainty." Elara's throat tightened. For 6 years, no one had asked. No one had looked closely enough to notice, or cared enough to ask twice when she gave her practiced excuses. Now, kneeling in front of the most powerful wolf in their world, she didn't know what to say. "Please," she whispered. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," Damien said, and something in his tone left no room for argument. He rose to his full height, and the change that came over him was immediate and unmistakable. The careful diplomat who had spent the morning exchanging polite greetings was gone. In his place stood someone the entire pack had only heard stories about. The Alpha King in his true authority. The one whose word reshaped territories and ended disputes that had lasted generations. "Gather the pack," he said to the nearest guard, his voice carrying easily down the hall. "All of them now." Word spread through Crimson Moon Pack like wildfire. Within the hour, every member stood assembled in the courtyard, confused and anxious, none of them quite understanding why the Alpha King's inspection had suddenly become something else entirely. Seraphine stood near the front, her composure cracking at the edges, while Elara hovered near the back, wishing desperately that she could disappear the way she always had before. Damien addressed the gathered pack with the calm authority of someone who had done this before, who understood that real change required more than private conversations behind closed doors. "I have seen evidence today," he said, "of harm done within this pack. Harm that has gone unspoken for far too long. I want the truth, and I promise that anyone who speaks it will be protected." For a long moment, no one moved. Old habits of silence were hard to break, especially in a pack where speaking against the Luna had always meant risking everything. Then, slowly, an older kitchen worker named Marin stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I've seen things," she said. "Things I should have said something about a long time ago." One by one, others followed. A stable hand, a young guard, even one of Seraphine's own attendants, each adding pieces to a picture that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Small cruelties, dismissed injuries, a pattern of fear that had quietly shaped the entire household without anyone daring to name it. Seraphine's protests grew weaker with each testimony, until finally she fell silent, the weight of years finally catching up to her. Damien turned to the Alpha of Crimson Moon Pack, who stood pale and stricken beside his mate, clearly unaware, or unwilling to know, what had been happening under his own roof. "As Alpha King," Damien said, "I hold authority over matters that threaten the well-being of any pack under my protection. What has happened here cannot continue." He spoke with the full weight of his position, laying out consequences that would strip Seraphine of the privileges she had so carelessly abused, and ensuring new protections would be put in place for every vulnerable member of the household, starting immediately. It was not a punishment delivered in anger, but a correction delivered with absolute resolve, the kind that left no doubt it would be enforced. When it was finished, Damien turned back to Elara, who stood frozen near the edge of the crowd, scarcely able to believe what she had just witnessed. "You don't have to stay here," he said gently, his voice softer now than it had been all day. "You have a choice. You can remain under the new protections I've put in place, or you can leave with my personal guard, under my protection, and build a life somewhere none of this can follow you." Elara stared at him, searching his face for some hidden motive, some reason This couldn't possibly be real. In 6 years, no one had ever offered her a choice about anything. Why? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Why does this matter to you? Something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable beneath the authority he carried so naturally. Because no one should have to hide pain the way you have, he said. And because the moment I saw what was on your arm, I felt something in me that I don't fully understand yet. But I know I cannot simply walk away and pretend I didn't see it. That evening, after the pack had been given new leadership to oversee the changes, and the household had begun, slowly, to settle into something resembling order, Damien found Elara in the quiet of the garden, sitting alone beneath an old oak tree. He approached carefully, as if she were something rare that might startle and disappear if he moved too quickly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. She nodded, still unsure how to behave around someone whose presence had upended her entire world in a single afternoon. He sat, and after a moment of comfortable silence, he reached for a small cloth and a jar of salve he had brought with him. "Will you let me?" he asked, nodding toward her arm. Elara hesitated, then slowly extended it toward him. No one had ever tended her wounds before. Not gently, not like this. She watched, almost in disbelief, as the Alpha King, a man whose authority stretched across every pack in their world, carefully cleaned and bandaged her arm with hands far gentler than she would have imagined. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why would someone like you care about someone like me?" Damien looked up, his eyes steady and sincere. "You misunderstand your own worth," he said. "You survived years of cruelty, with quiet strength most people could never manage. That isn't something small. It isn't something to dismiss." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "When I saw your scars, something in me responded in a way I've never felt before. A need to protect, to make certain nothing like this ever touches you again. I don't fully understand it yet, but I don't intend to ignore it." For the first time in longer than she could remember, Elara allowed herself to feel something other than fear or resignation. Hope, fragile and unfamiliar, began to take root where there had only been silence before. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "Neither do I," Damien said, with the faintest hint of a smile. "But I would like to find out, if you'll let me." Under the quiet canopy of the old oak tree, as the sun began to set over Crimson Moon Pack, Elara realized that for the first time in 6 years, she didn't have to hide. She didn't have to disappear, or shrink herself smaller, or wear long sleeves to cover what others had done to her. Someone had finally seen her, truly seen her, and instead of looking away, he had chosen to stay. And as Damien gently finished securing the bandage around her arm, he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever came next, he would make certain that the scars she carried would be the last she ever had to bear alone.